because it's cold, so I'll try to be brief. I was trying to think of a connection between Christmas and Casablanca, although I do think all of you made the right decision this Christmas Eve to be here. So as a member of the Post, as Bill said, and as a veteran myself, I'd like to thank you for supporting the Legion Drive-In and the American Legion Post 43. So 78 years ago in New York City on the 26th of November, 1944, Casablanca premiered. And I don't think,
42.
at least cinematically, the world has not been the same since then. One of our great critics that was a real ardent believer in the auteur theory referred to the work of director Michael Curtiz and termed Casablanca as a happy accident. And I think when you look at Casablanca, I'd phrase it a little differently. I'd call it accidentally on purpose. And I think it all started with the Warner Brothers, the only major Hollywood studio that was owned and operated by a family. The brothers, Harry, Albert, Sam, the most talented of the brothers, who ushered in sound with the Jazz Singer and sadly died the night before the Jazz Singer premiered in 1927. And of course, Jack Warner, Jack L., who ran his studio with a very iron hand and a tight fist, liked corny jokes, wasn't the most artistic man in the world, but he knew what a good movie was. And of course, Jack Warner's notion of what a great, how a movie star, how an artist under contract to him should behave was the first movie star that Warner Brothers ever had, Rin Tin Tin, because as Jack said, he never asked for a raise and he never complains about the food in the commissary. By the time World War II had started, Warner Brothers had switched from the rip from the headlines movies of crime movies of the early 30s that Daryl Zanuck as head of production pioneered, and the musicals and all of that. And they had switched to more literate pictures and a lot of war pictures. In fact, Warner Brothers was the first studio to come out foursquare against the Nazis before Pearl Harbor, before we were at war. And actually, in the summer of 1941, after they had released Confessions of a Nazi Spy, Underground, and films like that, and also used their radio station for the Hollywood Anti-Nazi League, the Warners and other movie people were hauled before Congress and forced to address why they were anti-German and all of this nonsense. And of course, after December 7th, 1941 at Pearl Harbor, all of the senators involved in that ran for cover. Hal Wallace was the executive producer. He had replaced Daryl Zanuck in 1933, and he bought a play in 1941 called Everybody Comes to Rick's by Murray Bennett and Joan Allison. That play, it's been kind of rumored that a lot of the play was just a outline for the movie, but in fact, much of the movie that you'll see here and that we all have grown to know and love were really based on that play. There were a lot of writers that worked on the screenplay for Casablanca, probably one of the most memorable screenplays with the most memorable lines, you know, from I'm shocked that gambling is going on here, to Play It Again, Sam, till We Always Have Paris, and so on and so forth. The heavy lifting in the writing department was Howard Koch and Julius and Phil Epstein, with a little assist from Casey Robinson. The Epstein brothers were both twins. They were both irreverent, and they used to like to make fun of the Warners, particularly Jack Warner. The Warners' motto that was painted on the side of the studio up the street in Burbank used to say, combining good citizenship with good picture making, and they would put a sign at their lunch table combining good picture making with good pickled herring. They also didn't like to work more than 2 hours a day, and Jack Warner said, you need to punch in and work 8 hours a day, just like a bank president, just like the head of a railroad. So they sent an unfinished script to Jack Warner with a note on it saying, hey, Jack, have the bank president finish this. Michael Curtiz. This is a guy who, I can't think of another director whose name is more closely associated with the output of a studio and the studio style than Michael Curtiz. He came to Warner Brothers in 1926 and he left in 1954. Before in Europe, and after he finished his career in 1961, he passed away in 62, he had directed 181 films. Some of the great all-time Warner Brothers films, in addition to Casablanca, The Adventures of Robin Hood, Yankee Doodle Dandy, Mildred Pierce, Life with Father, and so forth, were all Curtiz. Curtiz had an incandescent mania, that's the only way I could describe it, for filmmaking. Everything came after filmmaking, fatherhood, motherhood, husband, sex, whatever. In fact, Peter Lorre, who is in this picture and several Curtiz pictures, said that Michael Curtiz eats movies and he excretes movies, and I think that was about correct. For Humphrey Bogart, this film Casablanca was written specifically for him. Bogart had been under contract to Warner Brothers since 1935, mostly playing heavies, and when it got down to the final reel, he had to figure out where to grab his stomach and keel over after he had been shot as the bad guy. He finally got into the top rank of stars with High Sierra and The Maltese Falcon. And you can say that both those pictures made Humphrey Bogart a star, but I think as Rick in Casablanca, it really made him immortal. Ingrid Bergman, on the other hand, she was borrowed because she was under contract to David O. Selznick. And they originally tried Ann Sheridan, rejected her. They tried to get Hedy Lamarr to play Elsa. They couldn't get her. I think they tested Michelle Morgan, and Curtiz didn't like her. So Hal Wallace pitched Selznick, and he actually sent over Julie Epstein to personally pitch Selznick, who was there slurping his soup, eating lunch, and Julie went through a little song and dance ad hoc, and then finally he looked at Selznick, who seemed to be more interested in his lunch, and said, well, the movie's about, it's going to be a lot of shit like Algiers. And Selznick just nodded his head, and they had Ingrid. Now, Ingrid, in her later years, when people would talk to her rhapsodically about Casablanca, she would say, well, you know, I made other movies. And for someone who looked so great on screen, and she was tall, I think she was 5'9" or 5'10", and Bogart had to wear lifts on his shoes and stand on an apple box in several scenes where they were close or in a clinch. She said, oh, I'm not pretty, I look like a milkmaid. But I think Bogart had it right when he said, doesn't matter what I do, when you're with Bergman, whoever the leading man is, they're going to look good. Paul Henry, Monica Henry, my good friend. Paul's daughter is not here tonight. If she was in town, I would have invited her. Wallace bought out his contract from RKO and put his name above the title with Bergman and Bogart to get him to play his role as Victor Laszlo. I think he was perfect in the role. Sadly, his career did not get the lift that Bergman and Bogart got from Casablanca, and Warner's dropped him in '46, and unfortunately Paul was blacklisted, and he had to reinvent himself, which he did in a really top-notch fashion as a great director who directed many, many TV shows and movies and had a distinguished career behind the camera as well as in front of it. The character actors you'll see in this movie, I think one of the reasons that Casablanca is labeled the best movie of all time, or one of the best movies of all time, Claude Rains, Sidney Greenstreet, Peter Lorre, Cuddles Zakal, an old friend of Curtiz's from the music hall days back in Hungary, and Curtiz personally twisted Wallace's arm to get him in the picture. Conrad Veidt, Dooley Wilson, and all of the extras that you see trying to get out of the country when the film opens in Rick's Cafe. When you see these people were refugees. They were Jews fleeing Hitler. And the scene when you will see, not to give anything away because I'm assuming everyone's seen this movie at least 10 times, but there is a scene where La Marseillaise is played in Rick's Cafe, and you see people crying. You see LeBeau crying, and Dan Seymour, who played the doorman to the gambling place inside Rick's, said they were really crying because that's who these people are. And everyone associated with Casablanca donated 1% of their salary to the European Refugee Fund to help get people out of Europe that were stuck there, particularly Jewish people. Casablanca wouldn't be what it is and what it became without the music as time goes by. The music was done by one of the great movie composers of all time, maybe the greatest, Max Steiner. But Steiner did not write that music. As Time Goes By was an obscure 1931 song sung by Rudy Vallee and written by a guy named Herbert Hupfeld. Steiner was forced to use the song by Hal Wallace, didn't like it, wanted to write his own music, did it anyway, and it really, you can't separate As Time Goes By from Casablanca. They've become one. Steiner never thought much of it. When he turned his charts in to Hugo Friedhofer, who did the arrangements for him at Casablanca, he signed it. Hugo, you did a great job, signed Herbert Hupfeld. So he had a sense of humor about it. The picture ran some days over schedule. No one really knew what the ending was going to be. Now, they did know what was going to happen as far as who was going to go away with whom, but they didn't know how to play it because they were writing it as they went. Curtiz was alternately apologizing and losing his temper. It was not a happy shoot. However, when the picture was released, it was a gigantic hit. It was released initially in New York, and Hal Wallace wanted to change some things, and there's a letter from Jack Warner saying, the people are in love with it, it's great. If you try to fool with it, it'll look like a patch tire. Leave it alone. And he was absolutely right. So with that, Casablanca, I think, over the years, once it was released to television, once the fascination with Humphrey Bogart started in the 1950s at Harvard, it became a movie that very seldom movies become larger than life. Citizen Kane, Casablanca, a few others. It became really something unto itself. And I think why that is that during the war, a movie like Casablanca, when we were going through a crisis 78 years ago, it bound us all together. It rallied us all together. Now, as we're here at the end of 2020, we're at the end of another crisis, and I think Casablanca is still with us because when you look at it, doing the right thing with class never goes out of style. So I think this movie now, at this point in time, is even more pertinent than it was in 1942. So with that, I thank you again for coming. Enjoy the picture. Enjoy Casablanca. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. Thanks for coming. Thank you.